The future of cash in the balance, and major party politicians straddle the barbed wire fence. Coming up on this week's Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report for the 9th of October 2025. I'm Elisa Barwick. Joining me today is Citizens Party National Chairman Robert Barwick. Welcome, Robbie.
Thanks, Elisa.
And on today's show, we're going to be talking about some warnings from the Reserve Bank of Australia, which echo exactly what we've been saying about the viability of our payment system when you have no alternatives such as cash.
Yep.
And then we're going to talk about our politicians when you, particularly our leading politicians, Albanese, Susan Lee, situating them in the global picture. You can see the difficulties they're causing themselves by not actually having the courage to take a stand, and we'll develop that in terms of the international picture. Now, please help us get the word out and make an impact on these politicians by sharing the show, making a comment below, hitting the like button. Please consider donating to the campaigns that we're running and joining the Citizens Party as a member to spread and grow the movement more broadly. Now, before we get into the show proper, you have an update, I think, Robbie?
Yep. I spent the last 2 days in Canberra. While I was there yesterday, I went to the US Embassy. I made a TikTok post outside the US Embassy. Might give it to the producer, you can see me there. And it was about the fact that it's a week until Dan Duggan's final hearing, his last ditch hearing to stop his extradition to the United States. So what are we talking about? An Australian citizen with an Australian family who in 2012, for a little few months in South Africa, trained pilots, which included Chinese pilots, at a time when Australia was conducting joint military exercises with China, and America was trying to get in on those joint military exercises as well, right? There was no talk about war with China or anything like that. People, everyone was just rushing to do business with China. But later on, when that shift came, under the Trump administration, people in the US Justice Department indicted him for that, for what the training he gave. And the worst part of it, the part that I focus on in the video, is that it's not so much about what the Americans have done, it's that what the Australian government has done to facilitate their targeting this Australian family, and including by applying a law retrospectively so that he qualifies for extradition. Now, laws should never be applied retrospectively. That is what they've done. And if he doesn't beat this extradition, then he's going to be, exported off to the hellhole of the US justice system, right? Now, so this is quite serious. We've been advocating for Dan Duggan for the 3 years he's been in prison. Remember, he's never been charged with a crime, right? He's an innocent man. He's a military hero. Yet that's the way he's been treated by this country. The reason we're raising it now is the Duggan family have to raise $300,000 to cover their legal costs. They don't want to ask anybody for anything. They wanted to sell a property to cover all this. And the US government froze that asset so they couldn't sell it. And our government helped them freeze the asset so they couldn't sell it. So they need the help of their fellow Australians, right? And we'll put the link below, freedanduggan.org, where you can help. But quite urgently, they need 25,000 of that. Be more than what they've got now. They need an extra 25,000 of that before next Thursday's hearing to pay for the QC, or the KC they're called now, or the SC in New South Wales, the silk that is going to argue the case. Right, that has to be paid in advance, and that is really, really urgent. So please dig deep and help the family. Share this around. Look at the other videos we have on YouTube here about the Duggan case. Share this around. Help the family. We need to help them raise that $25,000 before next Thursday.
And for people who happen to be in Canberra, there will be a rally outside the courts Canberra next Thursday the 16th.
Yeah, starting around 8 o'clock, and Nolene and Craig Isherwood will be there, representing the Citizens Party. I will be overseas, you'll be overseas, so we're going to be in China. Elisa and I are taking a tour of China. This was planned long ago. If I wasn't going to be in China, then I will definitely be at this hearing and speaking at it, but Nolene and Craig Isherwood will be there to speak at it. If you're in the Canberra area, please get along.
All right, let's move to our first topic, the future of cash in the balance. Now, the first thing to think about when you think about cash is that despite
We want more of it.
and despite all of the commentary you hear, especially coming from the
Yeah.
banks and the Australian Banking Association, that, cash is declining, no one uses cash, etc., etc. Well, for the second time in a couple of months, the amount of money that the Reserve Bank of Australia has had to issue to keep enough cash in circulation has been a record amount, and we can put the graph up. It's reached a record amount of money in circulation at over $105 billion, according to the
RBA.
according to the RBA, which you see on the graph there. But thanks to the intrepid work of Jason Bryce from Cash Welcome, who keeps an eagle eye on these statistics all the time and puts out updates. So he described this as an extension of the extraordinary growth in cash over the last 12 months.
So that's real consumer demand, right? And the way it works, if that's what the RBA is issuing, like that tells you there is real demand out there. Because let me explain briefly. The only way the RBA knows what cash is required is the big four banks, and only the big four banks tell it, right? Because the big four banks are to have full control over the distribution of cash around Australia. The RBA used to have control of distribution of cash. It privatised with the big four banks. That's a huge conflict of interest, Elisa, because the big four banks have been driving the agenda to get rid of cash. They want to get rid of it. But they know from their internal bookkeeping and what's being dragged out of ATMs and all that kind of stuff, right? And what's being withdrawn over the counters. They know that they have to have cash on hand. And so they reluctantly tell the RBA, well, we need this amount. So if they are putting in requests to the RBA that are record amounts, then that's not even the full demand, I would wager, right? It's part of the demand. Second point I want to make in relation to what you said about people saying, "Oh, cash use is declining," because clearly, if the amount of cash on circulation is at an all-time record, that's one way of understanding it's not declining. The other way is ignore the statistics on this, because for two reasons. One is the Australian Banking Association keeps the payment statistics. They represent the big four. They want to get rid of cash too, right? But what they downplay, they talk about cash use as a percentage of all transactions. And if you look at and I should be able to grab it and we can put it on the screen. If you look at the graph of transactions, the real story is the explosion in transactions. Because with tap and pay and all that kind of stuff, people can just tap, and all their studies have shown that it's you suffer more psychological pain when you pay something in cash than when you're tapping, right? So all these young people, they're getting their cards and they're getting their phones and tap.
Don't feel it.
And they will tap for 50 cents, right? That just seems embarrassing to me to tap for 50 cents, but they'll tap for 50 because they don't carry cash. So you have had an explosion into transactions in the billions. So the actual use of cash has not, it's only declined as a percentage. And then here's the other part to understand. How do they actually measure it when it's cash? It's not showing up in the banks. The banks don't know how to measure it when it's cash. It's one of the things they're unhappy about. So they can measure all the other transactions. They can't measure the cash ones very well. This statistic that Jason Bryce keeps citing, that's telling you, hang on, there's plenty of demand for cash out there and it's being used. And
I'll tell you what, there would be more cash being used if it was more easily accessible. And there's a brilliant example of that which you brought to my attention this morning, which is Queenstown.
Yeah. Well, Queenstown, 2 weeks ago now.
Tasmania, that is.
In Tasmania, and people will know we've we've been advocating for Queenstown for the last 3 months. So 2 weeks ago, sadly, they lost their bank. The Bendigo Bank closed down. Yesterday, for the second time since then, the post office in Queenstown, which is where people were told you do your banking at the post office, for the second time since the Bendigo Bank branch closed, the post office ran out of cash. And they put up the licensed post office Facebook page for the Queen, so we'll put it on the screen. They said, we're out of cash. Please help us. Bring in your cash. They're appealing to the public to bring in their cash, right? Because when the Bendigo Bank closed down, they didn't just take out a way to get cash over the counter. There was a Bendigo Bank ATM there. They closed that too. That means there's one ATM left in the town.
Yep.
It's charging $5 a transaction, the one ATM. There's little shops in the town where you can get cash out, but because I talked to the locals in Queenstown, the shopkeepers, there's later this month, Elisa, there's a big festival coming up. It's called Unconformity, right? It's the big event for Queenstown for the year. The shopkeepers have already foreshadowed that they're not going to allow cash out over the counter with transactions because they know they'll run out.
Yep.
These bastards at Bendigo Bank, they are paying rent on that building until the 30th of June next year. They couldn't even delay the closure 6 weeks or so
for the festival. And
this is the position the town is already in. The festival hasn't started.
Now, all of this cash use and the need for cash is occurring, ironically, at a time when we've never had greater difficulty, apparently, distributing it and getting it to where it's needed. And so this is the other issue I wanted to raise, because people might have seen in the media this week or last week that there's been a deal made to rescue Australia's cash transit arrangements. So it's a deal that was signed between Armourguard, of course, which was the main distributor in huge financial trouble, the banks, the big retailers that need cash on hand, and Australia Post. And notably, it was a deal brokered in terms of the pricing and so forth by Deloitte, which has just been involved in a scandal for delivering AI-generated advice to government.
Wonder if they negotiated through AI.
So, as to the terms of the deal and how legit it actually is, who really knows, but apparently that deal's gone forward. And according to the reporting, at least according to the Australian Financial Review, it was decided that a quote-unquote utility-style model would be utilised similar to the electricity and gas distribution sectors. Now, initially you think, okay, that sounds great, because we've always said banking has to be considered as a utility, because that's what it is. It's one of those things that pumps through the lifeblood of the economic system, without which nothing happens. However, if you're comparing it to our system in Australia today for electricity and gas distribution, and you consider the fact that we've privatised and broken up those utilities so that you don't buy your electricity from the producer, you have middlemen that have been stuck in there retailing the product, all the infrastructure's been subdivided, it's been turned into a complete dog's breakfast. So it's actually not a viable model for anything. And again, given that Deloitte put together this proposal, you really have to wonder what the arrangements are. But of course, more will emerge about that over time. One thing I did want to point to in the coverage of this deal, however, which was rather interesting and comes back to what you mentioned earlier about how we used to distribute cash once upon a time, is that the AFR reported that the Reserve Bank of Australia and Treasury came up with a backup plan. Apparently they proposed in July. They asked the government if they could have the power, that being the Reserve Bank and the Treasury, to intervene to ensure the circulation of banknotes and coins in the case that the Armourguard arrangement fell apart. So it's interesting that that was raised as a possibility, because that is the pathway that we should be returning to, where you have government taking the responsibility to ensure the means of payment are available.
It's pretty sad though they had to ask for the power.
Yes.
Because what option would there have been if the Armoured Guard deal had failed, right? You've got to have cash. The Australian economy, especially regional economy, cannot function without it. You just do it, right? Especially because of the history, until the late 90s, the RBA was responsible for the distribution of cash.
Yep.
They would have depots around Australia, including in places like in somewhat remote areas. They would get it to the depots, and then the banks, with their arrangements with the cash in transit companies like Armoured Guard, would take it from there. But it was a shorter trip, less expensive, etc. And there was a hearing in Ingham, Elisa, in North Queensland, where smaller banks came and testified. This is in 2023. I went up there for it. And they were testifying on branch closures, and they revealed in that hearing that the cost of cash was in the top 3 expenses of a branch, right? So there's wages for the staff, there's rent and the fixed expenses of the building, and then there's cash. When the Reserve Bank was doing this, it was nowhere near as expensive. And in fact, there was a hearing in 1999, the first time there was a hearing in Senate inquiry into bank closures, that learned that in WA especially, Australia Post was responsible for the distribution of cash in the regional areas. And Australia Post ended that, and it went to the Armoured Guard companies, and the cost per week per branch went from $20 to $600. This is in the mid-90s. That's the difference. So, when this is something that should never have been given up as a government responsibility at all, right? The RBA should have always been doing it. You've got to take it away from these 4 companies that, like I said, have a vested interest in getting rid of cash. But anyway, at least now, so they've got a Band-Aid measure in place. We'll see how long it lasts. We will keep advocating that we need a government bank in post offices, right, that can combine the 2 things, the logistics of Australia Post to get cash around and actually provide the service for the people who need it.
And that solution is begged by another major intervention in the last week or 2. And that is the release of the October Financial Stability Review, which is conducted by the Reserve Bank of Australia, which had a major warning in it, which I believe did not get enough media attention, where the RBA's warning of disruptive shocks to the Australian economy, and they're stating that stress events, which could be cyber attacks, they could be outages, as we've seen so many of, will, as they said, amplify existing vulnerabilities, and we'll hone in on those vulnerabilities in a moment. But they put this in the background of the international picture with the, particularly they point to the situation in April where financial markets, they said, narrowly avoided extreme dislocations only because of the pause in some of the US tariff announcements. But they said the whole situation is still clouded in uncertainty relating to the trade and tariff disarray and related global financial instability and divergent moves towards digital banking systems. And that's where the real rub comes in, the moves for digital banking. And they have whole sections where they talk about the US move to utilise stable coins with the legislation that's been passed, the Genius Act, etc. But they do specifically talk about the major vulnerability in Australia being the rapid digital shift, which they note has heightened operational risks in an environment of rising cyber risk alongside elevated geopolitical tensions. And this report, by the way, came out the same day as the Commonwealth Bank experienced outages over a few hours in all capital cities. And of course, just not shortly after 2 major Optus outages, including the 000 emergency line outages for many people's phones, which even claimed lives. Now, the RBA went on to note that in terms of the digital capacities and the risk to critical services, they noted the third-party concentration of a lot of our critical services, including those provided by offshore companies. They described how this creates threats to our banks and our broader financial infrastructure. They warned that public confidence in the financial system is at risk, which is a big factor when it comes to finance, of course. And they basically, this was the bottom line, they said, look, advancing digitalisation of the financial system also increases the prospect that cyber attacks and operational incidents could have systemic implications. In other words, that the entire financial system of this country could be upturned because of the shift we've made to go digital without any backup plan. And regarding such a backup plan, they have this interesting note in the same vein as what I reported before about, you know, the alternative of the Reserve Bank and Treasury being suggested to deliver banknotes.
Yep.
In this case, they refer to the Council of Financial Regulators, which they say is, quote, developing capabilities to ensure Australians can continue to make and receive payments in the event of a material disruption to the payments system. So that they throw that in there. They don't have any more details about what that alternative infrastructure is. And as you said, we have a very workable alternative payments infrastructure, and of course it does very much include cash.
Just don't take cash away. It'll always be there as the mainstay for something that goes wrong, right? It's worth investing in. And like I said, there's efficiencies and economies of scale that can come from using the existing government. Cash is the government's currency, legal tender in Australia. The Reserve Bank is the government bank, and it should be arguably doing more than it is, but anyway, it's the government bank. It should definitely be responsible for the distribution of cash. Australia Post is the government's postal service, right? Combine them all and make sure that whatever might cause a disruption in the payment system, people can always resort to cash, right? But they've got to be able to access it easily. This is pretty serious what the Reserve Bank has gone through here, of course. But when you're listening, especially the way you've laid it out, the thing to realise is they're now saying, oh yeah, we've created all these vulnerabilities, but I didn't hear the Reserve Bank telling the private banks, and they have some rights to tell them. They have powers to tell the private banks what to do. At any stage, stop your mad rush into digital. Take it slower. I was mentioning this morning that I'm reading this book by a Chinese economist on the Chinese economic reforms from the late 70s onwards, and there's a metaphor that Deng Xiaoping used which was crossing the river by groping for the stones with your feet. I go really gradually and slowly to get to where you want to go. There's no need. What we do in Western capitalist things is disruption. Yeah. All disruption does is create quintillion-aires like Elon Musk, because there's these parasites ready to pounce, and they will be the beneficiaries. Meanwhile, you are ruining thousands, millions of lives at once. Oh, that's disruption. That's the wonderful capitalist system. Well, really? No, the Chinese have shown for the last 40 years. You have your goals where you want to go, right? Embrace technology, do all those things. That's why they had the most advanced payment system in the world, Elisa. Electronic payment system in the world. Everyone's jealous of it. Yet it's still required by law in China. You get fined if if you're a business and don't accept cash, right? Even though they have the most advanced payment system in the world, because you don't abandon people like we do in Australia. Our government has allowed them to do, and the Reserve Bank has not said anything. Now they're saying, hey, we've got some real vulnerabilities here. Oh, really? Yeah, you let it happen, right? So we've still got Australia Post. We've got a government bank. We need a proper retail government bank as that we're proposing. Let's make that work. And as the technology evolves, doing all these things, we can still be assured that we will have a contingency in any disruption. And
especially when you have a government bank operating through the post office.
Yep.
Because of the footprint, every town and village across Australia, in the middle of any kind of emergency situation, that capacity is there. It's protected, so very important. Major party politicians straddle the barbed wire fence. Now, it's becoming really obvious, despite the media not drawing attention to this in any way, that, and just undeniable by anyone who's paying attention, that the world is in the midst of a dramatic shift in terms of security arrangements and other, diplomatic arrangements. The divide between the war party that see their control disintegrating and pushing, wars between major powers, what could become thermonuclear World War III, and the other parties, the global south, the BRICS nations, those nations which are broadening and growing, that see an alternative and have envisioned and mapped out a better set of relations, international relations among nations and different arrangements, is becoming very, very pronounced. And the actions of Israel have made it all the more pronounced. And the international outcry against the genocide in Palestine, which of course has been really highlighted by the recent United Nations report that stated outright that this is a genocide being committed. And it was very, very clear at the United Nations General Assembly, and of course most Australians will not have in general seen or heard very much of what those speeches amounted to. They might have heard about the debate on Palestinian statehood and those things, which is important, but you can read in our Australian Alert this week a greater documentation of some of the speeches that were made by Global South and BRICS nations, particularly from, for instance, the President of Indonesia, Prabowo Subianto, the Brazilian leader, Lula da Silva, South Africa's president, the Chinese premier, even the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, who drew attention to the fact that all men are created equal, all nations have a certain innate equality, which is something that Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov drew attention to in his tour de force of history, which he took from the standpoint of course, the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Nazism in World War II, and who called for finally all nations to be given equitable representation in the institutions that resulted when history was changed in that 1945 victory forever. And the resulting institutions, as envisioned by, for instance, US President Franklin Roosevelt, was to end colonialism and to give all nations an equal footing and a voice at the table in the United Nations, for instance. And he developed the fact that instead of that reality coming about, the West began to build what they call the rules-based order, which is simply their rules and not international law. Yeah. And so when you look at the standard that international law demands, according to this recent United Nations report on the genocide in Gaza, the very law established in the wake of World War II to prevent such a genocide ever happening again, every government has a legal obligation, according to that document and according to international law, to use all means available right now and for nearly 2 years to stop this genocide in Gaza. But what you're seeing is that, so that's drawing out this divide, of course, but what you're seeing is that when you have leaders like our Prime Minister Albanese, who lack the moral fortitude and the courage to actually take a stand on that, even despite him having rallied in the past for Palestinian statehood, is that, nations like Australia are falling into all manner of problems simply because our nation won't take a stand on the global stage and take a side within that divide. Now, you were in Canberra this week, and also in the lead editorial of our Australian Alert, you referenced a number of the examples of collateral damage, really, because, when you have that kind of moral compromise, that the top leaders are making. The things that you listed, for instance, include the approval of AUKUS, which Albanese gave way to when he was opposition leader, Palestine and Gaza, those issues being ignored, a government bank being denied, even though Albanese has spoken in favour of a government bank in the past on principle, Daniel Duggan being jailed, David McBride. These matters of principle are falling by the wayside. On the financial front, ASIC being let off the hook, the National Anti-Corruption Commission being hobbled. As we wrote in our Australian Alert this week, Albanese's latest actions have extended the growth of the housing bubble.
Yep.
You know, even though they're saying we're going to help people buy a new home, no, everything they're doing is extending the problematic situation that we are currently in. So what's your reading of it, having just been in Canberra?
Well, look, it's quite frustrating. We're now 3.5 years into a Labor government. I had a list here in the lead editorial of the Australian Alert about what Albanese and Labor were watching for the 9 years they were in opposition, right? And what did they do? They watched a succession of Liberal governments smash the car industry and manufacturing generally, let the banks plunder their customers and the economy, which led to the Royal Commission eventually, repeatedly inflate the cancerous housing bubble, concentrate corporate power over the economy, expand the corrupt revolving door between government and corporations into a veritable freeway, protect white-collar criminals, destroy thousands of lives through robo-debt, torture innocent refugees in offshore hellholes, prosecute whistleblowers, waste Australian lives and resources in knowingly futile foreign wars like Afghanistan, protect war criminals, and follow US neocons to turn against our biggest trading partner, China. And so I pose the question, wouldn't you think that watching that in opposition for 9 years, when you come into government, you want to do something about it? Instead, what we've got is the list that you read out, right? There's the few things that have been done in a positive direction are agonisingly slow, and most of the time they're compromises to the point of betrayal. I mean, an Australian hero, David McBride, and an innocent man, Daniel Duggan, are in jail because this government is just because it's cowardly and subservient to the United States. That's why that's the case. I got to witness, I was there with Dr. Andy Schmulo, and on Tuesday night this week we sat in on the Senate Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee hearing where the National Anti-Corruption Commission turned up, right? And I can tell you it was a dynamic hearing. It was probably the most interesting one of the week. David Shoebridge, the Greens senator, who's actually a barrister, he was devastating because we now know that this is one of the first things that the Albanese government set up, the National Anti-Corruption Commission. There was a huge outcry for a corruption commission because of all the clear corruption happening at a federal level. We now know that Albanese personally intervened to make sure it was as weak as possible, for instance, not able to hold public hearings, right? I'm now convinced that what we have in the National Anti-Corruption Commission is what the two major parties came up with to be a fig leaf for corruption, not a watchdog against corruption. And the proof of that is the person they chose to run it, Paul Brereton. Now, Paul Brereton is related to David McBride. When David McBride leaked his information about war crimes in Afghanistan, Paul Brereton was put in charge of the Defence Force inquiry, which confirmed McBride was right. But that tells me he confirmed like 25 cases of different war criminals. However, Elisa, that would have been under the tip of the iceberg probably because his subsequent behaviour shows you that he's more of a cover-up specialist. And he started in that report as well because he said no one in the chain of command should be held accountable. He just went after the soldiers on the ground. And this is what infuriated David McBride, right? He said, no, this is the responsibility of the chain of command. That is always the principle of the military. But Brereton deliberately protected them. So he gets picked to be the head of the commissioner for the National Anti-Corruption Commission. And what Senator Shoebridge was able to demonstrate is that he has lied publicly. He has misled even his underlings at the National Anti-Corruption Commission and through them the government by claiming he doesn't have because people are asking about his conflicts of interest. You know, if you're going to be the head of an anti-corruption commission, you shouldn't have any conflicts of interest. Or if you do, they've got to be completely known so you can totally recuse yourself from those things. He has hidden his conflicts of interest. Anyway, we'll play a clip where part of the conversation between David Shoebridge, Senator David Shoebridge, and Philip Reid, who's the CEO of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Well, Philip Reid was put in the impossible position of trying to have to defend Paul Brereton. And I'm looking at this exchange, and I'm sitting in the room, and I'm telling you, I'm thinking, man, they were so hell-bent on this being a fig leaf for corruption that they were even incompetent in who they picked to be the guy in charge of leading it, right? Because he should at least be better at covering up his conflicts of interest than he is. Anyway, play the clip.
Mr. Reid, because of Mr. Brereton failing to tell you that, you've misled this committee and you misled the Parliament, haven't you?
In relation to duties, I don't believe so, in the sense that providing advice on a needs basis is not a duty. But, you know,
Mr. Reid,
I mean, it's
you could look at multiple definitions of duty. You can look
to...
at multiple definitions of duty. They are, for example, tasks, conduct, service or functions that arise from one's position. It's a task, service or function that arrives from one's position. That's what a duty is, isn't it? And this all arose because of his position of Major General, didn't it?
Well, it arose predominantly, I think, because of his, initially, because of his legal background.
But the only reason he's continuing to do it or able to continue to do it is because he had his extension as a Major General.
That's correct.
It flows from him being a Major General.
Yes.
And when I squarely asked you...
In the ADF reserve.
And when I squarely asked you, and you squarely asked Commissioner Brereton, he didn't tell you. And because of that, you misled Parliament. That's what happened, isn't it, Mr. Reid?
I'll leave that to others to determine.
Lisa, there's a legal term, Dr. Schmuller, who's a professor of law, kept telling me, and I can't remember it offhand, it's in Latin, but it basically means if you're the head of a body like the National Anti-Corruption Commission, you have to be perceived by the public to be completely clean, right? What I saw in that hearing was this body that Albanese and the Liberals have set up. I was watching all the body language of everyone in that hearing. Only a Green, Senator Shoebridge, One Nation, Malcolm Roberts, and Independent, David Pocock, were going after this issue. Only them. Everyone from the major parties sat there and looked uncomfortable, didn't say a word, weren't interested in actually taking it up. Because they know this is there to protect them.
Yep.
Right? This is the party that has like I said, the revolving door is a virtual freeway. Right? Everyone leaves these political jobs in Canberra and then they go to get high-paid jobs in the private sector, right?
Yep.
For the very companies that they were involved in regulating somehow. This is corruption the Australian way. And Albanese, as the Prime Minister, he now owns this. Instead of him coming in and saying, no, the Australian people are at breaking point. We've got things like we've got a dysfunctional economy. This housing crisis is completely ridiculous. People have probably seen the video from Bondi last week, right? The massive queue of people lining up for an $800 a week apartment,
Yep.
2-bedroom apartment, right? This is a broken system.
Yep.
And instead of fixing it, he's claiming he's fixing it, but doing the exact opposite. The 5% deposit, we discussed this last week, the 5% deposit, he knows is going to make housing much more expensive. When does this end?
Yeah.
Right? So that's the problem. They're not, these are people who are not serious about actually serving the people. And instead, he has this line that Labor aspires to be a party of government. And I said to them, if you want to be a party of government instead of a party of the people.
No, that's right, and that's what he declared at the when he spoke at the UK Labor conference. And talked about how hard it is when you're a party of government. You can't rail against things from the outside, etc. Which was just like his justification.
Working within the system is tougher than railing against it.
Yeah.
Right. It means Being a party of government means grappling with uncertainty and complexity. It means dealing with the gritty realities of the world as it is. The sad fact is, though, he's a Labor politician.
Yeah.
He was saying that at a Labor conference in the UK. He only has a party because truly great men a century ago who created that party didn't do it to work within the system. They started that party to change the system. That's why they gave us things like the Commonwealth Bank. That's why John Curtin went to jail here and down here in Brunswick and fought against conscription in World War I, so that silly Australians wouldn't think there was the British right to take us from here over there and be slaughtered for their stupid war between Queen Victoria's grandkids. Right? And he went to jail for that, and then he became our greatest Prime Minister ever in World War II and saved Australia by breaking with alliances and putting the interests of Australia first. And this coward he is not fit to lick their boots of those forebears. Yet he now carries the responsibility of this party on his shoulders, and they're running into the ground.
Now, if you thought there were any real alternative coming from the opposition, you probably didn't, but there is not. Susan Lee gave a speech on the 17th of September, which we've also covered in the alert, which, look, you know, the Liberal Party's fracturing, they're in big trouble, but they're doubling down, at least Susan Lee is, and the leadership, on neoliberalism. So, again, just more of the same of what we've seen over the 30, 40-year history of the bipartisan economic consensus of both major parties. So she took aim in this speech at big government, saying, you know, we can't rely on government to do everything. And she, in fact, echoed previous comments that we've drawn attention to from leaders like Joe Hockey and Tony Abbott, saying the most important job of government is to get out of the way and let the private sector do what it does, because it's only the private sector that generates real wealth, and, you know, goes on and on in that kind of vein.
A lot of garbage.
And she continued to rail against growing debt and so forth, which, look, it's a question of how you look at it, because when governments have control of debt, when they issue credit to develop a nation, you can look at every historical example, from, you know, the US after the Revolutionary War to Japan's post-war growth to China today, as you cited. Debt is not a problem. You easily pay it back if you're using it for the right things. And a classic example was in our post-war period, when even Robert Menzies, because of the impact of what the Labor Party had done during and after World War II, even he denounced laissez-faire and the market, which was what Susan Lee was, you know, cheering on.
Robert Menzies is a socialist, according to these modern liberals.
Yeah.
They're that lunatic. And remember, they're all cut from the same cloth as Javier Milei in Argentina, who's been there a year now. And we were told, oh, look what he's doing is so great. He's now being outvoted in every election that's coming up. He's gone begging to the Americans for a bailout. It's been an utter disaster what he's done.
These great policies that were supposed to totally turn things around.
Neoliberalism is lunacy. The history of Australia post-war. I mean, we embarked at a time of record debt, 140%.
You'll put the graph up here.
We had debt 140% of GDP at the end of World War II, Elisa.
Yep.
Our debt now is 40% of GDP. 140%.
Yeah.
We embarked on a project that was 15% of GDP in cost. 15%. Now, to get a bit of a perspective on that, what that might be in modern terms, the total iron ore revenue in Australia, which is huge, think about iron ore for our economy, is 5% of our GDP. We embarked on one project called the Snowy Mountain Scheme that cost 15% of GDP. But because we embarked on it and invested in it as a government, we built it on time, on budget, took 25 years. By the time we built it, look at the chart, the total debt of Australia had shrunk as a percentage of GDP because our GDP had grown enormously. We were investing in this country. The other day, shout out to our friend Martin North. He interviewed the commentator Tarek Brooker on a show about a week and a half ago. And Tarek pointed out that up until the late 80s, public investment in Australia, was always close to 10% of GDP up until the early 80s. when neoliberalism came in, it has shrunk to less than half of that. And this silly politician, Susan Ley, is railing about big government. We don't have big government, right? We've got tiny government. We've got a government that doesn't invest in the economy, leaves it up to the big four banks, right? We've got big corporations. We don't have big government.
Government by consultancies that get it from AI.
We don't even have a public servants. Exactly, it's from consultancies.
Yeah, a lot of what people blame on government today is not government because we've outsourced it.
Oh, speaking of which, let's just mention that briefly because I'm going to write about this. While we're in Canberra, one of the breaking bits of news was the scandal over Deloitte. So there's 4 big global consulting accounting firms, and Deloitte's one of them. EY, PwC, KPMG. Deloitte got this $440,000 contract from the government, Department of Employment, Workplace Relations. Now, when they, by definition, if the department is outsourcing a job to a consulting firm like Deloitte, it means that Deloitte has the expertise the department doesn't have. That's what you're supposed to believe. Deloitte clearly didn't have the expertise because it used AI to write the report. And what AI does is this thing called hallucination, and it invented these references, and then a sharp-eyed academic found that out. Basically, Deloitte cheated, made up a report cheating, right? Didn't have the expertise to do it, and still charged $440,000. So the news this week is that Deloitte has had to admit that that's the case and is refunding part of the money.
We'll give you a discount for that work.
Professor Andy Schmulo is far less forgiving than the Australian government. He said, he was telling politicians, this company needs to be charged with obtaining financial benefit by deception. That is a crime. What they did is a crime. And until we start, sorry, Susan Ley, you want to defang the government more. We've got to get fangs back in the government's mouth where they can take these corporations to task, get rid of them from these consulting firms running the government, get rid of them, clear them out. Let's bring back a proper public service who are just on a normal wage, not these massive consulting fees. Bring some real expertise back, because I don't care if you want small government or big government, you should want good government.
Yes.
Competent government, right? And that also means not corrupt government. And we have to run a revolution in this country to make all that happen. And you've got to do it around, build the institutions that can protect the people, such as a government bank.
And while you're in Canberra, just on a final note, you've established and put a lot of irons in the fire on various issues. You've got economics committees meeting with various agenda items that are, right in our purview coming up. We've got good politicians that are in there that are raising the right issues. So
yeah, we met with quite a few people to, in a sense, school them on questions they can ask of different agencies at Senate Estimates, which is on this week. And yeah, we are respected for the expertise that we have as an organisation which has developed our expertise on these main policy issues.
Yep. That's the show for this week. Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks, Lisa.
Get a hold of our Australian Alert. Join as a member. There's a link below.
Yes, definitely join as a member. We need members. We're on a membership drive. We're closing on registration in New South Wales. Join as a member. If
you're not sure, give us a call on the toll-free number. If you're not sure if you're a member or not, we'll help you out. All right. Well, yeah, thanks for tuning in, and see you again next week.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.